All right, here we go, A Pushers, chapter 4 and 5 combined. All right, so we're going to start by looking at indentured servitude, okay? That's the first kind of forced worker program that we had in what will become the United States in the New World. It was at its height from about 1607 to 1700. We'll talk about why that kind of died away and what replaced it. All right, a couple real important terms to know. The headright system, all right? People wanted more workers to come from Europe and England over to America. All right, so they came up with this headright system, which basically said if a plantation owner paid for somebody's journey to come to the United States, all right, they got 50 acres. Not the person who came over, but the plantation owner who paid for their trip over here. So it was a great deal for the plantation owner. All right, they got 50 free acres of land, plus they got this worker for 7 years because most indentured servitude contracts were 7 years. All right, so the headright system is a big deal, something that was very, very valuable to the plantation owners in the New World. All right, again, a contract was generally about 7 years. All right, in return for your payment for your passage over to America, you contracted yourself to work 7 years for whoever paid for that passage. All right. Once that 7 years was over, you were free. All right. You were supposed to be given land, tools, seeds, and animals, so you could basically become an individual farmer. All right. However, you weren't giving voting rights, and that's going to be really important down the road. Now, it's important to understand when this system first came into place, it was pretty rare for a servant to live 7 years. All right. So the plantation owners, the upper class, really didn't worry too much about what was going to happen when these people got to the end of their 7 years because a lot of them didn't live that long. As conditions got better in the New World, indentured servants started to live longer, they started to reach the end of their contracts, and they started demanding what they were promised. That's going to cause problems. All right. Because they're not going to get what they're promised, we're going to get one of the first major rebellions in America, really, really important rebellion called Bacon's Rebellion. All right. We get former indentured servants. They were basically kicked out of Jamestown. They were told you can't stay here once your time is up, get out. They weren't really given what they were promised. All right. And once they were kicked out, all right, they didn't have the vote. They didn't get their land. All right. So they were basically kind of stuck out here on the frontier. Because of the stuff that was going on with the Native Americans at the time, Governor Berkeley would not defend those settlements of indentured servants against Indian attacks. All right, so therefore we're going to get Bacon's Rebellion. All right, Nathaniel Bacon is going to act as a representative for the rebels, the indentured servants. All right, Governor Berkeley refuses to meet their conditions, and we're going to erupt into basically a little civil war in the Jamestown area. All right. Bacon was definitely the leader of this rebellion. He was the charismatic leader, and when he dies, it kind of falls apart. Governor Berkeley is able to put down the rebellion. Several of the other leaders are hung, and Bacon's rebellion is a failure. Here's the key to why Bacon's rebellion is such an important thing, though. All right, plantation owners look around and say, this indentured servitude thing is kind of a bad deal. All right, after 7 years, we got to free them. We're supposed to give them all this stuff. They kind of think that they deserve to be equal to us after they free. All right, so what we're going to see is a shift from indentured servitude to African slavery. All right, so when we talk about what causes African slavery to grow, if you would get some sort of essay that talks about what caused the rise of African slaves in the New World, you got to talk about Bacon's Rebellion because that's key. All right, that's going to lead to colonial slavery. All right, as the number of slaves increased, all right, white colonists are going to react to put down this perceived threat. And it is going to become a threat. By the mid-1680s, black slaves are going to outnumber white indentured servants. All right, by the mid-1700s, and especially a lot of the southern states, black slaves are going to outnumber white freemen. All right, so there's this inherent danger of rebellion. All right, and we're going to get some rebellion. All right. Too often times when we look at slavery in the United States, we act like the slaves were just like, yeah, okay, we'll be slaves, and it is what it is. All right. But that's not the way it was. All 13 colonies in the southern United States, in the western United States, we are going to get slave rebellions. All right, between 1780 and 1864, which is basically the foundation of the United States to the Civil War, we're going to have over 250 slave insurrections that were documented. All right, slaves didn't just lay down and take it; they fought back. All right. 91 African Americans were convicted of insurrection in Virginia alone during that time period. All right, we're going to have a lot of attempts to get your freedom in a lot of different ways, which we'll talk about a lot down the road. All right, the first revolt is going to become in 1526, really, really early on, in a Spanish settlement. All right. Later on in the Spanish settlements, we're going to get the Pueblo Revolt, or Pope's Rebellion in 1680, which is actually going to, for a while, kick the Spanish out of what is today New Mexico. All right. So we're going to get a lot of different slave rebellions and Native American rebellions during this time. Okay. The Pueblo Revolt and Pope's Rebellion is a Native American rebellion. All right. But we're going to get this rebellion by people who are going to be oppressed by the Europeans as they come. All right. One of the major rebellions, slave rebellions that I would know if I was studying for the APUSH test is the Stono County Rebellion. All right. About 20 black Carolinians, are going to meet the Stono River near Charleston. They're going to take guns and powder from a store. They're going to kill the two storekeepers they find there. All right. They're going to raise a flag. They're going to have drums. They're going to cry liberty. They're going to head south towards Spanish St. Augustine in Florida. At that time, slavery was not legal in that territory. So they figured if they got to St. Augustine, they would be freed. As a matter of fact, one of the first underground railroads, I always think of the Underground Railroad going north out of the southern states in the United States. But in reality, the first Underground Railroad actually smuggled people down into St. Augustine, Florida, where they would get their freedom. On the way, they were burning houses, they were killing white opponents, they were freeing slaves, and a growing number. Now, in the end, they're going to fail in this rebellion. They're not going to reach St. Augustine. Many of them are going to be captured and hung. But it was the largest slave uprising up to the American Revolution. Okay, this is going to lead to the introduction of slave codes. People are going to get more and more afraid of the possibility of rebellion. All right, and we'll talk about slave codes down the road. All right, when we talk about European settlement, especially English settlement in the New World, we have to talk about the Puritan theology, because the Puritan theology, especially in the North, is going to lead to a lot of ideas which are going to become part of the United States. All right, so Puritans had a semblance of democracy within their church. It wasn't like the Catholic Church, which was very top-down with the popes, the cardinals, the bishops, and the priests. Puritans were a much more democratic church. All right, there were voting rights to people who were church members, and that became voting rights in the township settlements themselves. All right, town hall meetings are going to be part of Puritan theology, and that's really democracy in its Puritan form. Many of the Protestant religions that broke away from the Catholic Church still have some democracy within their church. All right, and they still have these town hall meetings. Presbyterian Church, for example, is just one that I'm a member of, and we have basically town hall meetings. We vote on things. It's a much more democratic idea than a number of different churches. All right, villagers would meet in these town hall meetings. They'd elect their officials. They'd elect their mayors. They decide on civic issues. This is a democratic form of government. Now, it wasn't true democracy because not everybody had the vote. You had to be a church member, white, male. All right, so we have a very limited voting, but we do have voting, which is very different than what we saw in England. All right. We also have this idea of trying to create the perfect society. All right. Puritans sought to create what's called a utopia, which is a perfect society based on God's laws. Okay, we've talked about the idea of the United States as this shining beacon on a hill. All right, the idea of what's called American exceptionalism, which is something that's going to start really early in America that a lot of people still believe in today. America is a special place. America was put here by God, and therefore America is exceptional. All right. Oftentimes Puritans argued against slavery, and they did argue against slavery on moral grounds, that it was actually immoral to own people. Now, It wasn't so much because of their concern for the African slaves themselves. It was more of their concern that it made white people lazy. All right, that if other people were constantly working for them, they wouldn't have this Puritan work ethic, which we'll talk about here in a second. All right, so it wasn't a huge concern for the African slaves, but more the effect that slavery had on white people. All right. However, these ideas are going to lay the foundation for later reform movements. We're going to talk a lot about reform movements when we get into the 1800s. We're talking about abolition of slavery, women's rights, education for all, prohibition, getting rid of alcohol, prison reform, reforming how we treat the mentally ill. All of those things are really going to come out of this Puritan theology and often are going to come out of the church. All right. And again, Protestant work ethic. Those that are work hard, those that are faithful, are going to succeed because they're going to be seen favorably by God. That Protestant work ethic is really, really important. We still talk about Protestant work ethic today. Okay? Now, over time, as people settled in the New World, Puritans are going to begin to lose their religious zeal. All right, the Puritan population is going to move out of town as we start to expand out of these initial settlements. Once they move out of town, they're away from the control of the church. All right, there's going to be a lot of religious intoleration. If you are not a member of the church, your kids can't be baptized into the church. All right, and that's going to cause people to actually say, well, then heck with the church and move away even more. All right, that's going to lead to the Halfway Covenant in 1662. All right, it was an attempt by the Puritan churches to get more members. Okay, it's going to allow Puritan churches to baptize anyone, whether you're converted or non-converted, whether you're an original Puritan or whether you're not. All right, and it's going to get rid of this distinction between the elect few, all right, and the other members of society. All right, we're going to get a much more kind of democratic, kind of equal church. All right, we're also going to see at this point a huge amount of women that are going to become part of the church. All right, and that's going to be important down the road. All right, now another thing that's really going to hurt the control of the church is the Salem witch trials. All right, that's going to be led by a lot of Puritan clergy. As that falls apart and people realize that it's kind of a mess and there's a lot of false accusations going on, that's going to harm the reputation of the church as well. Okay, so we get the Salem witch trials. It's caused initially by a guy named Reverend Parris, who's going to start to kind of whip up this hysteria over witchcraft. Part of it's going to be land disputes between families, all right? If I have a dispute with another family, it's very easy for me to accuse the woman of the household of being witches, which will also look poorly on the males of that household. And it was a way for me to improve my standing and get more land. Okay, it all started supposedly when a Native American taught witchcraft to girls. Native Americans didn't practice witchcraft, so we know that that's not true. They did practice animism, which some might mistake for witchcraft, but needless to say, it was just an excuse. All right, girls were caught dancing. They began to throw fits. People were accused of putting people under another spell, and there's all kinds of chaos that breaks through here. A lot of discussion today about what caused the Salem witch trials. There's some thought that people were actually sick. There's some talk about epilepsy and whether epileptic seizures were to blame for some of the fits that were being thrown. But we know that the Salem witch trials is going to spread. We're going to have 19 women hung. We're going to have one pressed to death by stones. 55 are going to end up confessed as witches. And when the Salem witch trial kind of died down, we're going to still have 150 awaiting trial. All right, so we're going to see the hysteria is going to cause all kinds of problems. All right, it kind of gives us a signal into the strictness of Puritan society, and we shows how a rumor can cause hysteria and lead to illogical thinking. We know now that the Salem witch trials were a great example of that. All right, today we know that the trials and execution have been a mistake. And even at that time, very quickly after the Salem witch trials, it's pretty quickly recognized that kind of period was a mistake. Okay, so let's look at what the country looked like. What did the English colonies look like as we get to the eve of the Revolution, as we get into the 18th century, the 1700s? Okay, we got all different kinds of people mixing together. This whole idea of America as a melting pot. Now, down the road, we'll talk about the difference between a melting pot and a salad bowl. All right, at the time, it's a melting pot. We have people that are melting their different traditions together to form new traditions. And you can see that we have all different kinds of people in this area. All right, now, this is important. what was the draw to people to come to the New World? What was the draw of this colonial society? And the draw in a lot of cases is equality. All right, compared to Europe, 18th century society in the New World was very, very equal. Okay, now we're just going to ignore slavery, and of course we're going to ignore women, and we're going to ignore a lot of different people. All right, but it was still a lot more equal than European society. When we look at European society, we got kings and lords and this whole royal structure, and that did not exist in the New World, and that's going to be a huge draw to people that come to the New World. Most of these Americans, and I'm doing air quotes, which you can't see, were small farmers. When we talk about yeoman farmers, we're talking about small farmers basically who farm for their own production, what they need, not to sell. They might trade some things here and there, but we're not talking large farmers who are selling their crops all over the place. And again, the most striking feature of society in the New World is the idea that you could go from rags to riches. It was possible to go from being poor to being rich. Rare, but possible. That was nearly impossible to do in Europe due to the fact that if you weren't a lord or some sort of royal, in that royal structure, it was very, very difficult for you to break into the wealthy upper class. Okay, 90% of the population as we get into the 1700s is still involved in agriculture. Okay, as we get into 1800s, that'll start to shift. All right, very high standard of living because we have so many yeoman farmers. People have food. Very low, what we would call poverty today. People have what they needed. All right, fishing is going to be another important industry. It's pursued in all colonies, but it's a major industry in the New England colonies. That's going to stimulate shipbuilding, which over time is going to stimulate commerce. All right, commerce is going to be successful, especially New England, trading back and forth. And the triangular trade, which I'm sure you learned about world history, was very, very profitable. Okay, as New England merchants in the early 1700s gain access to the slave trade, now we're going to get that triangular trade going. We're going to have rum and guns and different things that are going to be brought to Africa from either Europe or the New World. They're going to be exchanged for slaves. The ships are going to cross the Middle Passage. They're going to stop in the West Indies where they'll trade their slaves for sugar, and then sugar is going to be brought to New England. All right, manufacturing does happen, but it's secondary. All right, we're going to get a lot of lumbering, beaver hats, a little bit of iron work, but for the most part, manufacturing in the 1700s is going to be secondary to agriculture. Okay, what is going to happen is England has become more reliant on American products like tar, pitch, turpentine to build their ships. Now remember, England still controls the seas. Their navy is by far the strongest in the world, but they're relying on American products to do that. That's going to be more and more important. All right, now as we get into the 1730s and 1740s, more and more of the American population is going to want European goods. Now the problem with that is the Europeans really don't want a lot of American goods, so we're going to get this trade imbalance. So Americans need to find non-English markets for their goods. They want to trade stuff, but England doesn't want it. All right, so they're going to start sending timber and food to the French. All right, Parliament's going to react with by passing the Molasses Act, which is going to end trade between the New World and the French West Indies. All right, the American colonists aren't going to be real happy with that, so we're going to start bribing and smuggling. And these are the first small acts against the British government. All right, it's a slow process, but it's the first small acts against the British government, which in time is going to lead to revolution. Okay. Within the colonies, it's important to remember that we have no roads connecting major cities until the 1700s. Even then, we're terrible. There's heavily reliance on waterways, and that's where population clusters are. Cities are along water. All right, taverns are going to be really, really important. We're going to get the mingling of social classes in the taverns, everyone from the upper class to the lower class. All right, and they're going to serve as cradles of democracy. And over time, that's where a lot of the agitation and the push for revolution is going to happen in those particular taverns. All right, we're going to get two dominant religions. In the south, we're going to have the Anglican religion. All right, they are tax-supported religions. In the north, we're basically going to have the Congregational religion. Okay, the Congregational church is going to grow out of Puritan ideals. The Anglican church is going to grow out of the Church of England. It's going to be more of a prop for royal authority, more worldly and less zealous than the Congregational church. All right. Over time, we're going to get the Great Awakening, all right, which is going to become in Massachusetts. It's going to be an attempt to revive colonial beliefs and colonial zeal in religion. Jonathan Edwards is often regarded as the greatest American theologian. He reaffirmed salvation by works. All right, you rejected salvation by works. You can't do good deeds to get into heaven. Instead, you need to depend solely on the grace of God. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God is one of his most famous works, which we will read in class. George Whitefield is another really important orator who traveled the colonies, putting on revivals, tent revivals, countless conversions. We're going to get a lot of imitators, and the Great Awakening is going to be the first true American kind of movement. All right. It's going to prepare America for its War of Independence. The Great Awakening is really important. All right. We could confront religious authority. All right. If the churches aren't living up to the believers' expectations, you can break off and form new ones. Guys, that's going to sound a lot like what we do with our government, right? The King George is not living up to the expectations of the American colonies. Therefore, it's okay to break off and form our own government. That's exactly what happened during the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening is also going to bring Americans together as Americans. It's an American movement. It's really the first time people are going to stop thinking of themselves as English and start to think that maybe there's this new idea of being American. What does it mean to live in the new world? And that's really, really, really important. Okay, one other major trial, the Zenger trial. John Peter Zenger was a New York publisher. He wrote a bunch of stuff about the colonial governor that was not very well liked. All right, Zenger's lawyer goes into court and says, "Hey, everything I wrote was true. Can't be libel. It's true." Okay, but English law at the time said it didn't matter whether it's true or not. You basically can't print a bunch of bad stuff about those in power. All right, however, the American jury acquits Zenger. That's the beginning of freedom of the press in America. Now, we're starting to get freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech are all going to become part of what is American, what will become America. Okay, remember, we don't have true democracy, guys, but it's a lot more democratic than England, okay? You have to have property in order to vote. Only about half the adult white males have the vote. It's not true democracy, but it's more democratic than England. All right. So when we talk about democracy, what is coming from this Puritan ethic? Ordered social system, an ordered government, a limited government, and a representative government. And those all are going to be what actually becomes America's government. Okay. That is Chapter 4 and 5, guys. Make sure you still read the book. There's some other stuff in there that's important, and it'll give you a little bit better idea. Until Chapter 6. Thanks, guys.